So we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Brian Cusack, and I work for Tripwire. I'm a systems engineer. I've been with Tripwire for almost 8.5 years now. Started out in computers, doing an introduction to DOS class for a bunch of people who were forced to go to educational classes every year. We're not at all keen on understanding the difference between a backslash and a forward slash. Got into databases, application programming, and did some work with Power Builder. Many of y'all know Power Builder. Great old tool. Visual Basic, and then for the last 8.5 years been doing the security work. Today we're going to talk about convergence, which is an interesting concept, and I think it's something that will play nicely with the tone of today's conference. But what I'd really like to do quickly, if you could just quickly give your name, what you do, and what you hope to get out of this presentation today. We'll start right here.
All right, I'm Denny Miles. I'm the Manager of Communications and Corporate Security. I work for Southern Star. We're a gas pipeline.
Okay.
And we actually had Tripwire, but I'm wanting to learn a little bit more about the product and maybe some different ways we can use it.
Beautiful.
My name is Ren Inshaw. I'm the technology consultant for the medical library at Louisville, and identifying vulnerabilities, especially the web.
Web-based. Yeah.
I'm Sharon West from Cincinnati, and I understand that you're going to talk something about audit and compliance.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying.
It's absolutely key.
My name is Conrad. I hack government websites, and I'm always interested in hearing about what people are going to do with risk management.
And what color is your hat, sir?
It's white.
Okay, very good.
Mike Garr, work for Credit in America, security engineer, as a lady mentioned, audit compliance.
And what do you do specifically as a security engineer?
Dabble in a little bit of everything since the size of the company is a little smaller, so we do technical as well as compliance and audit. So.
Great.
Pat Elledge, work for Xerox as a risk manager.
Great.
I'm Zach Estes. I work for Republic Bank as an internal auditor. With them, audit.
Interesting. And do you use tools in the course of your duties?
Yeah.
We'll talk about that later.
Phil Campbell, I work for Republic Bank. I'm an IT auditor, interested in just learning more about network monitoring, network security.
Okay.
Jason Dippins, consultant at Humana, dealing mainly in risk management, compliance, governance.
And how many of y'all generally work in some kind of risk management capacity? Right. I mean, in the end, security is all about managing risk. There's no way to fully get rid of risk, right? If somebody wants to get in, they're going to get in. Talk to RSA, right? As my friend from Eastern North Carolina used to say, locks are for keeping honest people honest. So we have to manage that risk. And how many of y'all have unlimited budget for security? Yeah. So we've got limited resources, and we need to find a way to maximize those. And so we have to be able to identify those risks, figure out which ones are the riskiest, and then that's then going to drive how do we attack it. Go ahead. Just a quick introduction and what you hope to get out of today. And what do you know about NERC-7?
A little bit more than I'd like. Not as much as I need to.
A good answer.
Dave Barker with the University of Louisville on the audit side, so just getting a better perspective of risk.
Perfect.
Deborah Miller, UPS, just trying to get an overall, he says, information on the rest.
Okay.
Jim Potash, assurance.
Yes, Steve Marriott, Humana.
And do you spell it like the hotel chain?
Yes.
Any relationship?
No, I quit. Yeah. Got another account with Bank of Trust.
And what do you do there?
Network administrator as well as ISO.
Very good. ISO 27000 and something.
Jared Ena, Commonwealth Bank, internal auditor, looking more to get more about internal audits.
Great.
I mean, consultant information systems, risk and compliance, and gender health care. Again, just trying to pick up new information. learn something new that I didn't know.
Well, I hope I
There's a lot I got to learn. So.
all right, I hope I can come through for you.
I'm Marshall, LG Energy. Interested in learning more about the balance between vulnerability management program versus risk.
Very good.
Jeff, looking at an internal audit, I'd like to understand the tripwire type product.
Will you come to the residence?
Rick Stibbs with Papa John's, Managed Security, with a focus on PCI compliance. Always looking for insights and managing risk.
Sure. So there's no doubt that Tripwire has been very successful over the last 8 years that I've been with the company, in part due to PCI, because it has a very specific requirement in it that says thou shalt do file integrity monitoring. Over time, that has morphed a bit, and it's become more, you need to be able to discern good from bad change. You need to do it on a regular basis. So they become stricter as they move along with the versions of PCI. But what's interesting is that there's a lot more to PCI than the one thing that we can help you with there out of the box, and we'll talk a little bit about that.
The tripwire has been a big part of ours.
I'm Stephanie Richardson. I'm an IT auditor with the State Auditor's Office.
Excellent.
I'm Jessica Whitaker. I'm also an IT auditor with the State Auditor's Office.
And do you guys use tools during the course of your duties, or do you just go and look at stuff and ask questions? Both.
Online, yes, interested in learning more about vulnerabilities.
Okay.
We're also with the state auditor, public,
Great.
So with the Auditor's Office.
There's a whole thing going on.
It's a
theme. All right.
Amy Fisher, IT auditor.
Don Price, UPS, just here to stay abreast of technology.
Okay.
J.R. Lilly, UPS, just helping to learn something interesting.
Brad Cooper, Remote Access Technologies, Savannah.
Okay. And do y'all think about HIPAA at all? Like, is that something that you are concerned about?
Dave McLeod, I'm manager for security and compliance. I'm care home base. Hoping to get kind of measurements, KPIs, maybe.
Right. So that's one of the things that I'll talk about is this concept of connecting security to the business. And as my boss says, business folks tend not to want to invest in things that they don't really understand. And to give you a comparison, if you put a CEO in the elevator with your CFO, how many floors of elevator travel do you think it would take before the CEO would have a pretty good understanding of where the company is financially? They've got all those terms, net profit, they got all these things in common. They understand some of the same language. I'm guessing 2 or 3 floors. Now you put your CIO in there with the CEO and try and get your CEO to understand where you are in terms of security and compliance. How many floors is that going to take? 50 or 60, right? And still, at the end of it, they're not going to fully understand what's going on. So having a way to show what we're doing in a way that's going to work for management, upper management, is really important. Because, I mean, how often do you hear, what do you guys even do? I don't understand what security is all about. We haven't been breached. Why am I paying you? Right? So, it's a very important part of this.
Oh,
who you
I'm
are,
sorry. I'm Alex Mack. I work at Convergence. I am an IT audit manager.
Terrific.
My name is John Fellers, also work at Convergence from Cincinnati, so we had a long haul down here.
Yeah.
I'm a senior manager for information security, so I do different stuff, penetration testing, encryption, forensics.
Beautiful.
Gene Shapiro, Kentucky Employers Mutual Insurance. I do all the security stuff. I wear many hats, auditing and vulnerabilities. That's where my interest is.
Compliance, all that.
Carl Wilson, Information Security Officer, U of L Physicians, doing risk assessment and management.
Jacob Rutledge, UPS. I'm a developer, so just looking to get a different perspective.
If you guys just wrote all that code securely in the first place, right? Okay. Well, we've got a variety of sort of thoughts and ideas about what's going to happen today. And here's my agenda. So we're going to talk about convergence. We'll talk about what it actually might mean. We're going to put it into the context of information security. We'll talk about some examples that are out there in the world, and then we'll talk about some real technical ones. And for those of you who are interested in a sort of a deeper understanding of specifically what Tripwire's tools do, I can certainly have that conversation with you after lunch or during lunch or afterwards. We'll be here all day, so I'm happy to get into that. But this is going to be a more general conversation, although we'll touch on some Tripwire functionality. Okay, so there are a bunch of different definitions for convergence out there. And depending on what dictionary you look in or which website you look it up on, you'll get different ones. But we're going to focus on two today that I think are kind of interesting. So one of them is technological convergence, which is the tendency of different systems to sort of evolve together. And then we'll talk a little bit about evolutionary convergence, which describes the development of the same biological traits in unrelated organisms that have fundamentally different jobs in an environment. And so I'd like to just kind of take a look at some examples. So in terms of technological convergence, right, there was a time when your game box was just for playing games. And then they realized that they really want more time, more of your time, more of your attention. So they added in the ability to browse the web, right? So now you can do social interactions with your Facebook page. You can buy stuff all right through your Wii or your Xbox. Pulling different pieces of functionality together into one piece. It was about 2002 that I had my MP3 player, I had my personal digital assistant, I had my clam phone, and I thought I was styling technologically, right? I had all this cool stuff. I had a terrific digital camera, and I still was using, V8 or whatever it was for video. But I had all this great technology. It was a thing of beauty. And you think about today, all of that stuff and more, fits in the palm of your hand. It's pretty amazing. So, all these disparate tasks that somehow got pulled together into a single piece of machinery. Now, there are some examples of technological convergence that really didn't work that well. Technological convergence can have a tendency to get out of hand. Does anybody know what we're looking at right there? It's a TV on a refrigerator. And I think this is an excellent example of convergence gotten a little nutty, right? Because people are not going to go into the refrigerator and pour themselves a little water, get some ice, and be watching TV at the same time. How many of y'all have seen those TVs on gas pumps, right? When you're pumping gas, they're hitting you with advertisements the whole time. I'm looking for the down volume button. Leave me alone. These are definitely examples where it's gone a little too far. We all have one of those in the garage, right? We wish. But again, an example where maybe the mashing together of things really didn't turn out in a way that was particularly effective. Now we're going to talk a little about evolutionary convergence. And again, this is where you've got similar attributes doing different jobs. And we're going to talk about it in the context of wings, right? So you've got a bat, and he's got wings, and their job is to help that bat find and eat insects. And then you've got a butterfly, who also has wings, right? So it's the same basic... What is that noise?
They're drilling logs.
Oh, that's what they're... Okay. Sounded almost like a baby was crying. Insects, they've got these scalar wing things with pigment and powder on them that helps them get around. But they use that same structure of a wing to find and drink nectar. And then you've got a hawk, right? Same idea. It's got wings, but they're very different. And they're about being able to find and eat rodents. And so this idea is that they're all wings, but they end up with very different jobs. And we're going to talk more about today evolutionary convergence, but we're going to put it into the context of information security. So one thing I want to be clear about is that we want to avoid the refrigerator with a TV, right? And in some ways, it's very hard to take an IPS and a wireless access point and make them one, right? That's not really going to work. But there are places where you end up with different tools with different jobs, but they have the same underlying architecture, structure, design, and language. And we're going to sort of explore that concept. Again, the idea is that we've got this kind of common goal, but we get there in ways that leverage this concept of convergence. So Tripwire has been sort of focused on a couple of different areas. How many of y'all do vulnerability assessment right now? And there's a whole plethora of tools out there that you do that with, right? It's all about identifying situations where you need to patch, right? You've got vulnerabilities associated with a given version of an application on a given version of an operating system or a particular device, and it's got some vulnerabilities associated with it. All I have to do is implement these patches and I'll fix that problem, in essence. And then you've got security configuration management. What is security configuration management?
Securely configuring something.
That's obvious. And how many of y'all manage that process right now? That is, you keep track of your configurations, you're on top of them. If somebody goes out and makes a change, you know immediately whether that change negatively impacted the security of your configuration or not. Good man. It's a little hard to do. We'll talk about that. But the idea is that security configuration management is a key component of what Tripwire can provide. And then there's this concept of file integrity monitoring. How many of y'all do that? I want to see all those PCI guys. Yep, there you go.
Our company does it.
Okay, but you're not necessarily in charge or working with it, right? And the whole idea there is that there are all kinds of changes that happen in your environment. How do you determine the good change from the bad change, right? And you know, the reason that PCI specifies that is they want you to be able to get to these changes are all changes that potentially represent risk to the organization, and I need to investigate those and maybe fix them, set them back to the way that they were. And there are all kinds of issues around that. We'll talk about that maybe. But so the idea is that the key concept is that similarities are good, but differences matter. Each of these tools is doing a different job, but they're going to have some underlying principles that are going to help unify them. And that's really what I'm talking about when I talk about convergence. So we'll take a look at that. And we're going to talk about it in the context of information security. So y'all have all kinds of devices in your environment. You've got databases, you've got your virtual infrastructure, you've got desktops, wireless access points, you know, the whole concept of bring your own device. There's a whole range of products that you've got in your environment. And then you've got sort of on this scale the depth to which you look at those devices and how often you look at them, right? And so within this, we're going to talk about the three tool sets that we were discussing just a minute ago. And we'll start with the sort of broadest but shallowest, right? So vulnerability management is all about scanning your environment to look for those vulnerabilities. It doesn't look particularly deeply into those devices. Of course, penetration testing will get more deeply into those devices. But you do ultimately want to scan the entirety of your infrastructure. How many of y'all doing your vulnerability management currently scan the entire infrastructure, every single IP? How many don't? Are y'all familiar with the Maginot Line?
Yep.
Anybody want to share with us what that is or was?
It was supposed to be an impenetrable line in France to keep Germans out, but it was useless.
And why was it useless?
Because they were hunkered down in one place and the Germans were mobile.
The Germans walked up and said, okay, here's this really big fortified fort. They're really well armed. We're just going to go around it. And they did. Right? That is Windows XP. Right? If you have one of those out there, because I've got this application I have to support, it doesn't have patching anymore because it's no longer supported by Microsoft, and so we've got these issues, right? So the idea is that with vulnerability management, you really want to scan the entirety of your network so that you can find all of the IPs that are up and running and make sure that you've addressed whatever security vulnerabilities you found, or you're able to assess the risk and then create for yourself a waiver or some sort of documentation that proves, look, we know it's here, we thought about it, we've analyzed it, but we still need to run this application, and that requires, whatever it happens to be. So that's the idea, pretty shallow. Then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got file integrity monitoring, right? So we're actually looking at the contents of files, their attributes. What is the owner, the group, the permissions? Are they changing? Are they changing in a way that's bad, right? Is this part of my change management process or not? Is somebody going and making changes during production hours? Or did somebody come in at 4 in the morning and make some change when nobody should be there, right? So that's what file integrity monitoring is all about. Anomalies or changes that threaten file and system integrity or introduce risk. Much deeper than vulnerability assessment, but it typically is only done on a smaller section of your environment. And most people are only looking at their database servers, file servers, maybe your virtualization, maybe you get to applications or your firewalls, but a lot of people don't really do the file integrity monitoring piece that far out. It tends to be for compliance requirements, and so you're really focused on just what's key critical to the organization. And then you've got security configuration management, which is not quite as deep as file integrity monitoring, but a little wider. Not quite as wide as vulnerability management, but a little deeper, right? So here you're looking at, are my systems securely configured? And how many of y'all have a standard for how to securely configure your devices? And is it documented? And then how do you enforce it? If I get on a system and I open up Telnet on a production server that faces the public, how do you find out about that? Vulnerability scanning will pull up some of that stuff, absolutely. Let's say you change the minimum password length to 7 instead of the recommended 8, or you change it to 2.
We use CCM.
CCM. There are tools out there. So the point is there are tools out there that allow you to sort of see that configuration is no longer the way that it should be. What standards are y'all using? Like there's the Center for Internet Security.
CIS and PCI.
Okay, and PCI. Very good. Anybody else, other standards? DISA or NIST? COBIT? Okay. So different ones. In the end, if you look at a Windows Server 2008, there aren't that many configuration options from a security perspective. It's not a short list, but it's a finite list. And the beautiful thing is the Center for Internet Security publishes how to securely configure a device like this. Turn this on, turn that off, set this to 14, whatever it happens to be. Any questions about any of that? Okay.
What are your thoughts on, you say vulnerability management is wide but not very deep. What are your thoughts on credential vulnerability scanning? Doesn't that kind of increase the depth of what you're getting from the vulnerability management?
Absolutely, right? If you're doing non-credentialed scanning, you're not going to get nearly as much as you can get as a credentialed user. You can get into more of the software that's actually installed and things like that rather than what happens to actually be running. All kinds of things, absolutely. Preferably, you want to be able to do both because you kind of want to see what a non-credentialed user is going to be able to get at, but you also want to be able to see what's actually on the systems. Right. Any other questions? Right, so again, security configuration management, you're going to cover more of your network and at a slightly deeper level. But the whole idea is that this is in many ways a good sort of representation or example of defense in depth, right? There is no silver bullet in security, as we all know, right? There's no single thing that you can do that's just going to solve all your problems. So we're left with the idea that we need to do a lot at different levels. And so this is a good example, in my estimation, of sort of what defense in depth might look like. So the next point is, so you got all of these device types, and there are certain commonalities associated with these device types in terms of the management structures. So the idea is, ideally, you would have some way of talking about risk, priority, dependency, business value across the entirety of your infrastructure. Oftentimes, what happens is we get sort of siloed, right? We end up with one set of constructs around this part of my infrastructure and a different set in the other part, and it becomes very difficult to get that overall picture. However, the concepts are really the same across them, right? there's risk associated with the stuff that holds my payment card information or my health personally identifiable information, and then my lab server that's just serving as a print server is a very different story. So you need ways to sort of describe your environment and describe the risk associated or the importance of different assets in a way that's going to work across the entirety of that infrastructure. And then you've got this sort of how often we're going to scan and the types of scanning we're going to do. And so there's policy around that, how often we're going to do it, when we're going to do it, at what level, how do we deal with exceptions, what about alerts. And the idea is that these are kind of the commonalities across all of this that allow us to get to this concept of convergence. And the question is then, how do we pull all this together to really provide defense in depth in a way that's going to work? Okay. First thing what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about where this is actually happening, not just Brian up here talking about it, but in terms of the analyst community and the regulatory community, where we are seeing examples of this. So some of y'all have mentioned that you're in the power industry. The NERC SIPs, NERC stands for North America Electric Reliability Council, and then SIP is Critical Infrastructure Protection. And they came up with a whole bunch of requirements around how power companies deal with their infrastructure. How many of y'all remember when the Northeast power grid went down? That was pretty exciting, huh? I was in New York City doing some work for a company right on the Hudson River, and thinking about hopping on the Amtrak train back to Boston that night, which did not happen. And all of a sudden, all the servers in the back room started thrashing on and off, and their generator hadn't kicked in properly, and it was a big, huge mess, people running around crazy. I sat next to a woman on a bench with thousands of people stuck on the other side of the Hudson with no way to get home. And she said, again, the terrorists have hit us. And I was thinking, nobody knows what happened yet. Maybe apparently it was some branches on trees that caused an interruption, that caused another failure, that caused a fault that happened down the road. And the processes and the procedures in place couldn't deal with that situation. And so it got out of hand, and it ended up with New England, all of the Northeast being out of power. Happily, my buddy was in a new building, and they were connected to the grid in a different way, and he had power, and we watched TV and drank beer and had a great time. But, there were literally hundreds and hundreds of people on the street for the night, just sitting there. And it was a nice night, but New York City was a mess the next day. And if you think about it, if somebody actually had bad intentions and went after our grid, it would be catastrophic. And so the NERC SIPs are an attempt to try and get that security, make that part of what they do. So the point here is that in previous versions of the NERC SIPs, so they're up to version 5 now, it's not yet been implemented. 3 is the current version they built for, but then they're going to kind of give it a miss and go to 5 is what it seems like is going to happen, although it's not yet sure. But the idea is that in version 5, they put together configuration management and vulnerability assessment into a single SIP, where before they were these requirements were scattered throughout the NERC SIPs. And I think it's an excellent example of how a regulatory agency sort of sees, these are related. There's some commonalities here that we can take advantage of to be more efficient. How many of y'all are familiar with the Monetary Authority of Singapore? Not too. Well, it turns out that they actually are pretty important on the banking side because a lot of money goes through Singapore. And same idea here. They are building out, it's called a consultation paper that was released in 2012, which is kind of their guidance for what the next version of their requirements will look like. And in it, again, they had network and security configuration management and vulnerability assessment and penetration testing were dispersed through their requirements, and now they put them side by side. So we think it's indicative of, again, this concept of these things are coming together. Any of y'all familiar with GCHQ? This is it's called Government Communications Headquarters. It's in Great Britain. They have this tremendous round building, which when I saw it, it looked at me and I thought, they couldn't build a Pentagon, could they? So they have their 10 steps to cybersecurity. How many of you, and it's based loosely on the 20 critical security controls from SANS. How many of y'all know about the 20 critical security controls? Great. So they kind of reorganized them a little bit in this. And as you can see here in what we've highlighted, secure configuration, apply security patches, and ensure that the secure configuration of all systems is maintained, create a system inventory, and define baseline build of all ICT devices. So that is security, configuration management, vulnerability management, and file integrity monitoring all in one piece. And that, again, that's not how SANS organized it. But it is the way that GCHQ has kind of put it together for the Britons. Any questions about that? One thing I do want to point out. SANS 20 critical security controls are one way that we can communicate security to the business. Because it is a well-defined and well-understood set of, or almost like a framework within which to consider IT. And let me give you an example. Our network guy at Tripwire went to our FO and said, I'd like to get this next generation firewall. I think it's really important. And I also want to do DLP. And our CFO said, that's great. Where do those show up in the SANS 20 critical security controls? And he said, well, they're down there at 117. I think one is 16. And the CFO said, well, what about 4 through 10? That's where we need to be, right? This is a prioritized list of the controls that you need to put in place. And it's not, just me and IT saying this is the stuff that's important. This is SANS. This is, the defense industry and a bunch of large corporations that all collaborated on this concept of what's really critical. And what they say is that these top 4 are the only ones that are very high. That is, these controls address operational conditions that are actively targeted and exploited by all threats. What they're saying is if you do nothing else, do these things. And then go through that list in a prioritized way. Begin to deal with our limited resources. And the beautiful thing is, right, this is, number one is you got to know what's on your network. What's up. I need to scan my network to see and discover what's actually running out there. Number 2 is you got to know what software is running on what's on your network. Number 3 is you must do security configuration management, understand the security of your configurations. And number 4 is vulnerability management. Right, so those top 4, again, right out of SANS, pretty exciting stuff. Then the last one is a couple of examples. So one is from a paper that Anton Chuvakin did for Gartner about vulnerability and security configuration assessment, solution comparisons, where he's pulling those concepts together. And the other one is from Securosis, implementing and managing patch and configuration management. And again, the idea is that they are pulling these seemingly disparate concepts together because truly they make sense from a convergence kind of perspective. This part of the graphic, it's a little hard to see on this painted wall, I apologize. But right here in the middle of it is vulnerability assessment and security configuration assessment. And this is an extract from Dr. Chuvakin's article. And it points to the central importance of those two concepts, right? Vulnerability management, security event management, configuration management, right at the center of his analysis. So the question then is, where are the wins? Where do we actually see technical examples of this? And not surprisingly, Tripwire's perspective is that, vulnerability assessment, security configuration management, and FIM is those 3 different functionalities that can leverage this concept of convergence. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Key to this is, and this is actually a conversation that I've been having with our folks. So how many of y'all are familiar with a company called Encircle? So they do a tool called IP360. They also have a tool called CCM for security configuration management and some basic change management. Tripwire bought them earlier this year. And going back to that SAN slide, 1, 2, 3, and 4, Tripwire just did number 3 of the top 4 all by itself before. But with the purchase of IP360 and Encircle, we need now do all 4 of those top 4. So very exciting for us. That it's not Tripwire just saying. But the idea is that I'm having a little trouble conceptually figuring out understanding how my systems are securely configured or not, and where vulnerability management and looking at vulnerabilities and patching levels, where the one picks up and the other drops off. And it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. But if you think about it, the concepts of how you organize your assets, the risk associated with them, they should really be consistent across all of those different disciplines. And that's I think, the most important thing. We'll talk about how these can be proactive controls when they're properly and fully leveraged. We'll talk about the language of risk and this whole concept, again, of connecting security to the business. And if anybody wants to talk about the various flavors of file integrity monitoring, again, I'm happy to talk about it at the end of the day. All right, so this first concept is similar views. So again, if you're talking about asset grouping, you're talking about the risk associated with different assets within your environment, you don't want to have to reproduce all that information in 14 separate tools that are looking at different aspects of this. You really want to have a common way for all of these different disciplines to access and use that same data. Because they all think about, this is a risky asset, or it's a critical asset for PCI, or for NERC SIP. It's a part of my critical infrastructure, so I need to protect it. So this whole concept of the way that we organize things by geography, by compliance oversight, service dependencies, that's all going to be consistent across them. And they've all got this concept of risk and severity, right? You have configuration failures, you have unpatched system, and you're seeing suspicious change on it. If you can somehow make all of that work together, you're going to have the picture of, wow, that's an asset I need to go take advantage of, or fix. They can all be used proactively, right? So, there's definitely an argument to be that each of these is reactive, right? I run a scan, I react to that, I go get patches to update appropriately. I look at the configuration of my devices, they're insecurely configured, so I go fix those configuration settings so that they're secure or right for the way my operation runs. But at the same time, you can use these to help, determine where you are overall in terms of your patching strategy. Our overall risk for the organization and our infrastructure was at X level today. We went and did a bunch of patches, and now we're a little higher. So we're driving that process in a proactive way to get better. The same idea with SCM, right? The idea is that you want to be able to determine your posture and show that you're improving. CIS says we're at 70% today. I want to get to 80. So I'm going to use this information to drive this move towards being more securely configured. And for your change management process, you can actually send a lot of what change management tools pull together in terms of changes that are potentially damaging or interesting into your login sim tool as a way to help drive, is my process working? Does my change management process work or not? And if not, how do we solve that? So it's a way to help drive the improvement there. How many of y'all are familiar with CVE? Right? And then there's also CCE. Have y'all heard about that? And SCAP? So the idea is, what's the whole point of MITRE's Common Vulns and Exposure? What is that about? Why do we have that? Why did they create it?
Common language.
If we don't have a common language about this thing, being able to identify this particular vulnerability so that we all know what we're talking about, it becomes very difficult to do our jobs. So CVE is all about providing that language so that we can generally understand each other. CCE, same basic idea for configurations, right? So the same concepts about whether you're securely configured or not. And the idea is that these concepts are all critical to, in the end, coming up with a way to grade the risk to my enterprise based on how my systems are set up currently. And a huge part of this, again, is connecting security to the business. Finding ways to show, what we've improved our security thusly, and to be able to show that to your executive staff in a way that gets them to understand the importance of what we do so that they'll give us more money. I mean, in the end, that's an important thing. And the ability to sort of roll all that information that each of these three disparate tools does so that you can actually get a view of where we stand in terms of risk to the organization. So, again, fundamentally different jobs for those three tools, but you leverage a lot of the same information and language, and that pretty much is the definition of convergence. Okay? So what does it look like? Well, this is an example of a dashboard where we're pulling information in from all of those tool sets. So we're looking at the vulnerabilities that we found through scanning for vulnerabilities. We've looked at whether antivirus is actually running and whether it's whether those signatures are updated. We're looking at unapproved changes, whether the systems are patched appropriately, whether they're configured appropriately from a security perspective, and rolling that up into a number that's easy to consume. And we've all heard the sort of old saw about the executive staff. They want to see numbers and colors. They should be primary colors, and it needs to be very straightforward. And the fact is that they do like that stuff because they're not going to spend 2 hours trying to understand what's going on. Are we getting better or not? Are we more secure, less risk, or not? Because otherwise you guys aren't doing what you're supposed to do, right? And the idea is that by pulling information in from these disparate sources, we can come up with that aggregate score and give us methods to compare what's going on. This section of my company is doing really well. This other group isn't doing so well. We need to work together to figure out why you guys aren't doing so well. The organization as a whole is going a certain direction. That's good, or we need to focus on it and do better. But the whole concept is to color that rating with all of the pieces of information from the various tools in a way that's actually going to make sense. Now this is an example of a drill down report. So you could look at this report, and it might be a report that I would give to my executive staff, and it just shows me, looks like Portland's not doing so well. The other guys are doing better. They're passing more. They're not they're not moving down in the scale. But if you drill into that, you can see that it's really amongst all of the asset types that I have in Portland, it's the database folks that are having the biggest problem. Right? So, and as you dive into that, you can see, oh, it looks like it's the SQL Server folks in particular that are having this issue. And the idea is that, again, having this ability to drill in, you can give this information to different actors, more high-level management, more, the guys involved with the DBAs. And you can color it with all of those other sources of data to come up with a consistent representation of risk to the organization. And this is one where we're looking at, again, putting all of this into the context of, we've got a bunch of vulnerabilities on this system. We're not securely configured. We've got changes that fall outside of our change management process, and we've got events that are potentially suspicious going on there. The ability to pull all that together gives us a tremendous advantage. Now, I want to be clear, Tripwire is not there yet. And I don't think anybody else is. But would you agree with me that if you could have a risk rating for each of your assets based on all of these kinds of data, do you think that would be helpful?
I think the smart answer is yes, but I think the better question is, and I think everybody in the room would probably agree, it's great in theory, but in practice, implementation and practice, it's a little more complicated.
Absolutely, there is no doubt. And really, this is more about sort of where we hope to go than anything else. But that's definitely the direction in which we're headed. Okay, so in the end, the bottom line is you don't really, a fully integrated suite that does all of these things at once, it's going to be overloaded. You've got tools, they do things, they do them well. So there are some key concepts there. One is you want to share context, right? Some people think that this is a beautiful flower, and other people think it's a weed. It shouldn't be there. And the question is, in context is going to allow you to do that. All of this information, all these different tools should share that context. They want to be able to be independent but cooperative, right? These data sets are very different, but they need to find a way to work together. And then they want to leverage the common frameworks, what we talked about, the way that you tag your assets, the information about how important it is to you, etc. Does anybody know what this is right here? It is the Rosetta Stone. And what was the Rosetta Stone? Why is it important?
Show the relationship between hieroglyphs, demonic Greek, and
Sumerian.
thank you.
And the purpose was that we had a way to translate some of these dead languages that we couldn't have figured out otherwise. Very exciting stuff. And the idea is that hopefully, the goal is that these common frameworks are going to give us that language so that we can speak to risk and importance to the organization across all of them. So, we talked about what convergence might mean, what it means in the context of information security, some examples, and then some technical examples. Any questions? Is it cool enough in here for you? I'm glad I'm up here working, because otherwise I think I would have frozen. I really appreciate your patience. If there is anything that you'd like to talk about, I'll go.
Will the presentation be available?
Should be.
Yeah, it's actually just been recorded both on video and on that computer. So yeah, if you're interested, absolutely. Just come see me afterwards. Anybody else? Okay, I'd love to talk. If you have questions or you want to learn more about something, I'm here and available. Thank you very much.